of our discussion on real learning in the home. I'm Stephanie Weinert here in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm a mom of 5. I've been homeschooling for 6 years, and I'm so blessed and excited to be here tonight with Elizabeth Foss. She is a homeschooled mother of 9 children. She's been homeschooling for about 30 years or so, and she has the full spectrum of experience from children currently in middle school, high school, college, about to start graduate school, graduated from college, married with children, thinking about homeschooling grandkids. So she has the full gamut of experience, and we're here to chat about education in the home and also to celebrate the re-release of Elizabeth's book. I have the old copy with the old cover, Real Learning, Education in the Heart of the Home. It will be re-released in a couple of weeks. We'll let you know as soon as it's out. And we're talking through the book. So last week Elizabeth introduced the concept of this new idea of learning and this invitation to what home education can be for each of us. We talked about the home education philosophy of Charlotte Mason. We talked about education being an atmosphere, a discipline, and a life. And we talked through what that practically can look like in your home and in my home. So if you missed week 1, definitely go to Elizabeth's YouTube channel and watch the week 1 recording because it was so good. And we're going to unpack the next chapter in Real Learning tonight, which is language arts, and be in for a long discussion because Elizabeth and I both love this topic and we love books. But Elizabeth, welcome tonight. I'm excited to talk about this topic with you, the best topic ever.
Well, I think it's so funny because you said we're going to unpack this topic tonight and it's all about books. And we moved into this house 3 weeks ago. And we've unpacked everything except there's 15 boxes of books over there because we ran out of bookshelves. So we'll unpack as much of this topic as we possibly can tonight, but maybe not all of it.
I know, that's a good problem to have, not enough bookshelves. I know, so we're moving in a couple weeks and my husband's like talking about, because we're moving to an older home too. So my husband's all about, making sure everything is structurally sound. And I'm all worried about bringing in a carpenter to build built-in bookshelves in every room. Like, that's what I'm worried about.
Right.
He's like, get in line in the budget, honey.
Yeah.
But it's so fun to have a lot of books.
You get in the house and you find out all the other things you didn't budget for.
No, don't tell me that. Don't jinx me. Don't tell me.
Don't fill those bookshelves right away.
All right. So you had in our notes a beautiful quote from your friend Sarah McKenzie about this topic of, well, anyway, I don't want to steal the quote from you, but let's start with that quote and launch into our discussion tonight.
So Sarah has a really great, well, she's got 2 really great books, but in her really great book, The Read Aloud Family, she said, if you want a child to know the truth, tell him the truth. If you want a child to love the truth, tell him a story. And I just think that quote right there sums up so much of what real learning is about, what home education is about. Like, I love the quote because we're not about hammering a kid over the head with facts. We're about winning or wooing a child with winsome facts, with truth. And story is what brings so much of it to life, whether we're talking about science or history, or whether we want to bring even art, and to some degree math, like all of it. The books are the thing for sure. Mm-hmm. And the books are not textbooks. We talked about this a lot last week. The books are great stories. They're fine language. They're good illustrations. They're written by people who care passionately about what they wrote. If they're picture books, they're picture books that the adult wants to sit down and read it again because it's just so beautifully done. And those are the things I think that make the child love to learn, make the child love the subject matter. And I was thinking, in the case of if reading or how do we get a kid to like books or to care about books. And one of the things that really struck me when I was kind of mulling it over is my kids know that if I have a passion, pretty much the first thing I'm going to do is go get a book. Like, so in their minds, I think over time, books mean something to be excited about. Oh, mom's excited about gardening. Look, there's the stack of books, you know. Mom wants to know about old houses. There's the stack of books. Like, we could go through my bookshelves and see what all my little rabbit trails have been in the last however many years, because if you're excited about something, you get a book about it. And I think that's just kind of one of those things that makes real learning what real learning really is. And I, you know, we can talk all night about the practical ways that we're going to teach writing, or the ways that we can help children read. And I think all those are really important. But what we really want is to ignite in a child an appreciation and a love for the written word and everything it can hold, like all the potential between the covers of a book. And then the flip side of that, all the ways that they can make their own imagination and their own ideas and their own emotions come to life on paper. So it's both, and they go together totally. I can't really tease out reading from writing, but I think more than anything, that's what we're here about. We're here about the child and the connection and the relationship. And real learning is so much, at home education done well, is so much about the relationships in that family and in that home, but also about the relationships with whatever you put the child into contact with. So whether that's art or music or nature or a great trip or a great story, what you want is the child to have a relationship. And that's where we're going. And sure, the mechanics are important, but let's talk about the why of it in order to get a real grasp on what we're doing. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does make sense. And you know, all of these things, the wonder, the passion, the imagination that you talk about, this introduction to story and to the written word, when a child experiences that and falls in love with that at a young age, it's also an introduction to the kingdom, because it is through wonder, through passion, through imagination that we come to encounter, each of us human beings, the big story, the greatest story ever told. And through each of these picture books, these fairy tales, the nursery rhymes, the Mother Goose, all of it awakens in a child a desire, an appetite, an appreciation for imagination and wonder and the story that is so key for teaching the child the big story. And I love thinking about that and knowing that even when I'm just teaching, you know, opening a book and reading on the couch with a fun library book that has nothing to do about God in the pages,
right?
It's part of that child's introduction to his or her Lord, because that's how a child first understands, is the story and being introduced to the story. And so I love how this is it's not just education. Well, it is education, but it's educating to the highest good too, when we start teaching children these things, this passion, this wonder, this imagination from a very young age.
I think you're 100% right. So I think when we begin to think about what we want for a school year or even for a season, we start with the books. Like, what are we going to read? And when we want to create an atmosphere where reading and writing are supported and encouraged and nurtured, then we begin with reading aloud. And okay, so yes, we do. We begin with the books, we begin with baskets of books, we begin with reading aloud, but we also begin with looking at our homes and looking at our lives right now and saying, what are the things that distract my child or entice my child away from books? So I think we have to look at screens. I think like the first thing that we have to do in preparing good readers and good writers is we have to take an honest look at the screens in our lives. And I'll tell you, I've been homeschooling long enough that I actually have perspective on homeschool before a smartphone, before social media. What was it like to take young kids who were not readers at a time when the big mantra was turn off the TV. Like that was it. That was the only thing I was competing with. And it was very simple relative to right now for me to control a television in our house. It wasn't a very big house, one TV. I'm the mom. The remote goes up here, done, like it was easy. And it's not easy for us now. And, I think about us in this season, this right now, even if you were a person who at the beginning of 2020 said, I'm going to get a control over my screen habits. I'm going to put my smartphone far away from me. I'm going to not use the TV with my kids. If you had 100 good intentions and you got to the middle of March and the whole world was stuck inside a screen, like you couldn't buy groceries without getting inside your screen. So now we're in the unfortunate situation where it's become even more ubiquitous. And who knew that could happen? Like I never imagined a scenario where we could have had, gone from what it was to more. But I think it's really, really important that I honestly believe that the success or failure is so contingent on your ability to control digital media. We can't compete with a television set. Like we can't compete with what's inside the screen. And neither can books. It's not even a fair competition. Reading requires effort. You have to bring yourself to it. You have to focus. You have to concentrate. It requires your attention. And TV and scrolling and video games are much more passive and they require very little. And now TV doesn't even require attention. Like if you drift off, if you walk away, you just go back and click the button and rewind and it's all good, And so what's happening, and it's happening to us too. Like it's not just our kids. Our attention spans are diminishing. And in some ways we're victims, like we're willing victims, but we're victims of an industry that has trained us, has rewired our brains to get our hits of dopamine in very short segments, to start to get antsy if it goes longer than a 30-second Instagram story. Those things are happening to our brains just because we're practicing them over and over and over again. So a child who is used to being able to click a button, watch TV, get a story like fed to them without really having to bring much to it, it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable to say, okay, let's sit down and, give me 15 minutes of your attention and we're going to read this story. So we need to think about that. And we need to probably sit down with Dad and have a chat about how can we try to stuff it back in the can, try to make it new. And really, truly, the beginning of school year is a great time to do this because It can be all about it being being the beginning of the school year. But begin to create an environment that values books, that values reading, that gives you time and space and quiet to think deeply. So I guess that's my first encouragement, is figure out what things are distracting them and take those things away or limit them. Because learning to read and learning to write require the opportunity to read and write, and they require the chance to enter into the story, and those opportunities are thwarted when there's something else distracting them. So that's my TV soapbox.
So let me play some devil's advocate here a little bit, because being such a unique year, as you mentioned, there are a lot of families who will be homeschooling who are also both parents working from home full time and are going to try to fit that in, or who have multiple ages, or are going to have the new baby, or all that.
Yeah, and there's people who are going to have to be on screens to access various aspects of the curriculum too. Like,
so what are some practical things? Like, could you say we're not going to have any screens until after, maybe in the morning? So get reading done and writing done in the morning, and nothing before 2:00 or something like that.
That's where it's so critical that there's no one right answer. It's like when we talked about establishing a household rhythm. My household rhythm isn't going to look like your household rhythm. And that's not going to look like the household rhythm next door. Everybody's is going to look different. So if you are working from home, I know a mom who was during the absolute shutdown, who was working. She was a nurse, but she had 2 very vulnerable children, so she wasn't working on site. She was a home health nurse. So she was working as a home health nurse, but she had, I'm going to say 3 and a 6-year-old who really could not be running around while she was working. And, she used some videos, but she also hired my daughter to sit in front of the screen, because my daughter wasn't at her house. But, Katie read to these girls and interacted and chatted. So there was definitely a screen involved, but that was the solution they came up with. And I think that's the thing. Like, I don't think that there is a black and white to any of this. I think that these are extraordinary times, and we have to think outside the box, and we have to be creative, and we have to do the best we can. But the point is, try to think about eliminating the things that are competing with books as much as you can, because it's a great thing if they get a little bored, if they're looking for something to do, and you can put a book in their hands. That's awesome. That's a good thing. Yeah. And so think about ways to create a situation where that's a thing.
Yeah. Yep. Totally agree. Okay. So limiting screens, and setting, this is part of preparing the environment for real learning. We want a lot of good books. We want an excitement for good books. We want to limit screens so that children have the opportunity to really use their minds and form the discipline of listening. So what's the next step in setting up an environment for a love for reading in the home?
So, it really, it's so hard to look at all the ages. So I think that it's important, if you have little kids and, you have a kindergartner, first grader, a slow reading second grader at home, then reading is going to be the thing that you're going to be most concerned about. That's just the way it is. And some of that is, reading is so much our society's litmus test of whether education is working. Oh, well, is he reading? And if he's not, something's wrong. And sometimes something isn't wrong. Sometimes it's just a matter of brain maturation, and it's a developmental process, just like listening and speaking. And you know what? I don't know any mothers who doubt their ability to teach a healthy child to speak. And when you think about it, speaking is a very complicated thing. Listening, understanding what words mean, articulating those words back. But it is a rare mother who doesn't think that she can teach her child to speak. We speak, we listen, we hear, we understand. We also read and write, and it's very analogous. And it's also an art. I think that it requires patience, and it requires receptiveness on our part. We have to watch the child and let the child lead and see where that child is going. And it doesn't take an advanced degree usually to figure out how best to meet the child where they are and help them learn how to read. And I also think, and I know this is the case in my own house, and I'm sure this is probably the case in lots of other households, but the child who reads early is not necessarily going to end up being the better reader or the better student. Just because a child takes more time to develop a skill doesn't mean he's going to be less proficient at that skill. And I remember my fifth child, who was my fourth boy. So I had kind of a developmental idea in my head of how boys progress with verbal and reading skills. And he was a slow reader. And I remember being concerned kind of towards the end of first grade, that May. And Mike and I talked about saying, all right, well, let's just do a first grade do-over. He's smaller in stature. Let's give him an extra year. It'll be fine. And by October of that year, he was reading like crazy. Like he was a ridiculously good reader. He went from I can't read to Harry Potter in like 3 days. It was the strangest thing I've ever witnessed. That child's never gotten a B in his life. He was probably, and it was actually between second and third grade. So he's probably well into 8, almost 9 before he was reading. But he went from not reading at all to totally reading. And that's not the only kid I've seen do that. So don't panic. Just that be patient and don't panic. And don't rush that pre-reading stage. Don't worry that you have a 5-year-old and you feel like you just gotta hurry, let's get to it, because that pre-reading stage a lot of times is where a kid develops a love of story. There's you can do to teach reading before you ever teach reading, right?
Right. And you will never get that time back. It's such a precious, sweet time when they're in that pre-reading stage. I listened to a talk that Cersei Institute produced. I can't remember if it was, I think it was Andrew Kern, but he talked about how from a science, he brought all this scientific research into it that he believes that reading first starts with the ear, and that the very best readers are those who were read to a lot. And that there's something in the brain when the brain hears words over and over again and repeating in the sentences, that those scientifically become the best readers because of the ear, not the eye, which was really eye-opening to me because I hadn't thought of it that way, that all the read alouds in the pre-reading years were actually part of teaching them reading.
Oh, for sure.
But it's so true that by the time you've got a child ready to read on his own, if he has been read to a lot, he becomes a great reader, like often becomes a great reader. So I love that encouragement too.
Excuse me, what do you need? You're all done. Okay, that's nice. I had to take my glasses off because it was glaring off my computer camera, and she's standing in the hallway signing. I can't tell what your hand cannot see you. What do you want? Which actually, sign language is another like really good pre-reading thing, because that connection of the tactile representation of sounds and letters, baby signing time and signing time. Now I'm talking about videos. See, I just said turn off the TV, but you know, that's part of our lexicon, and that's another thing. Like children who are taught to sign, they tend to speak better and to read earlier and more fluently. So thanks, Sarah, for that little.
Did you do it with all your kids, sign language? We're doing it this year for the first time because I need to do it for Beckett, so our family's going to learn together, but I've never done it before.
Oh my gosh, it's so fun. It's such a great thing. It really is. We did it with all of our kids, but we did it more after the signing time video. Like it was just easier when signing time videos started appearing. And we were early adapters. I mean, we waited as they came out. But I've done it with all of them, but much, much more with the later ones. So anyway, little digression into silence.
No, that's okay. That's okay. It's good. Okay. Where are we? I don't even know where we are here. Okay. So,
okay,
good.
So
reading begins. Okay,
yeah.
Go ahead.
So, you know, I think your first objective when you have a pre-reader or when you have a reluctant reader is to develop a sense of story. We want kids to understand that a story has a middle, a beginning, a middle, and an end, and that structure is part of the meaning. So we want to get them to predict, what do you think's going to happen? Like, what do you know about the subject? Where is this going? And all those things that ask you to engage with the story, to understand that this is going somewhere and that you will be rewarded with this experience. I think those are all so important. I think that the best place in the world with those little ones, for you, for them, is just cuddled up next to each other. You know, look at the book, point to the pictures, do all the things, because those are the things that create that bond and that sense of warmth around what you're doing. Oh, we're reading. This is time with mom. This is like, you begin to feel that hit of dopamine, because this is a pleasurable experience that you are doing with somebody you trust, and you can count on it over and over and over again. So I think that establishing yourself as a reading family and beginning to develop a sense of story in kids is so crucial. Reading aloud introduces a child to all the facets of good literature. If you choose your books well, you get fine vocabulary, you get excellent syntax, you get compelling stories, you get beautiful illustrations, you get art in your lap, you know, and it's gonna expand their vocabulary, it's gonna expand their oral language, and all those things are really, really good. I think our enthusiasm, like if you pull out a picture book, you're like, oh my gosh, this is such a pretty book, come see this pretty book, like, and it's real, then they get it. So be enthusiastic about that physical book, treasure it. You can read it to death, but also show your children how you treat it as something they value. You value. My kids have heard forever, you know, be careful with that, I want to read it to my grandchildren, which was a huge joke, by the way, as we are unpacking books here. It's like, Mom, you know, you really have grandchildren here to read them to, you know? I'm like, okay, so I told you, be careful with the book. But they've survived that long because we've treated them like something beautiful. And they're part of our family culture. I need a charger. You know, do book talk, Stephanie, like where characters from your books and like favorite books you're doing a read, like they become part of your family lexicon?
Yes,
You know,
it's like the inside jokes.
That's just a thing.
Yes, which I would pay money for. Like they come out of my kids' mouths and it's like, oh my gosh, they were really listening. Like they really, really were listening.
Right.
It's the best.
I just think that, you know, I love to, when we're reading a book aloud, and I love listening to how, without trying, they'll sometimes pick up on that author's style or something that author says or a phrase from that book, and it somehow gets into like everyday conversation. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
So
yep.
I think that's, you know, it's really important. And I also think that if you're reading aloud and you're struggling to get through the book, there's a really good chance it's not a very good book. So if your 5-year-old hands you a Disney princess cartoon book every night to read and you're like, I don't want to do this again, maybe find something that's more enchanting than that, you know? Something that you both love. So those are,
and it's okay to hide those books too. We've had to do that.
Sure. Maybe they get lost sometimes.
Yes.
No,
yes.
Every once in a while.
Yeah. You also mentioned to start collecting books too. How do you collect your books? Do you buy them new? Like, do you buy them online? What do you do?
Well, in the beginning, there was no Amazon. So
right.
I'm so dated myself. I mean, I remember the first children's book that I bought as an adult. I bought in the college bookstore at the University of Virginia, my 3rd year of college, and it was a beautiful anthology, all the Peter Rabbit stories in one book. Like that is how memorable that was for me, and how expensive on my budget that was for me. So in the beginning, you know, it was definitely brick and mortar stores, and they were major treats. We did a lot of asking for books from grandparents and as gifts, because there wasn't a lot of money for books. I did some yard sale and thrift sale shopping. I had taught kindergarten and 1st grade before I had children. And so I had developed a little bit of like a starter classroom library. So I had that going in. It's funny, my daughter is gonna teach she's got her first classroom next month, tomorrow. And she's having books sent here as she's beginning to figure out what she's doing. And she's doing a lot with thrift books. She's ordered a lot from them, but it's just so exciting to me to see like the books that she's choosing to put in that box on her very limited budget, and seeing reflected there like what was a winner a long time ago. So and then to know what books to buy. I can't recommend the Read Aloud Revival more. Like, go there. Listen to what Sarah says. Look at her book list. Just, you know, mine the depths of the treasure of wisdom that site has been built to something so great. But also, you know, go to Barnes and Noble where you can touch the books, where you can see them. You know, the big advice is always take your kids to the library. And our library here is open, as in we can order books to be held for us and we can pick them up. But we've lost the browse factor, which is so weird to not be able to browse it. But make friends with the children's librarian, and, you know, go to the library. And then if there's that one book that your child wants you to check out check it out again, check it out again, check it out again, then you know that's the book that you're going to buy and you're going to read every night at bedtime for the next 6 months. And I mean, I can remember now a book called Parade that Michael just carried around with him everywhere. And finally we broke down and we bought the book. And I think that's a really good way. And it's also a treat, you know, a way to say, I noticed what you loved and I know you want to have it for yourself. And I understand that feeling. So here, let's go buy this book. So yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, no, that's good. All right. Okay, so we're collecting books. We're being enthusiastic about books. And then your next point, let living books become an integral part of your family culture.
Right. Yeah. And I think that, you know, when we read books aloud, everybody hears it. They all know it. And then the other way that it works is I have seen this scene repeated over and over and over again, where you tell an older child, could you read to so-and-so? And they go and they pull a book off the shelf and they gush. I love this when I was your age, or, you know, this was my favorite book when, and I'm seeing it repeat itself now. We've relocated and we're very close now to where my grandchildren live. And so I see my kids now go running up and finding a book in our bookshelves and saying, oh, you should read this book about this, and doing that same thing. And that's all part of the family culture. And what's really cool now is for me to be able to pull a book off the shelf and say, oh, you see how it's all taped up? Well, your daddy, you know, read this book so many times that we had to tape the binding, you know, and it's a pretty cool thing, but that's books being part of family culture. And, you know, so you read and you read and you read to them, and then you want them to learn to read. And I mean, some of my kids honestly have pretty much figured it out on their own. You know, I haven't had to do much formal teaching them to read, but most of them, you know, once you see them starting to do that print to text, that speech to text match, where they can show you that they understand what a word is, that it's bound by that space, and start pointing to not necessarily reading the words, but understanding that those words represent something, then you can bring in some phonics, because phonics is not a dirty word. It's okay to give it all some structure and to intentionally teach it. And there are plenty of good phonics programs out there. You know, we don't need to parse them all. We Teach Your Child to Read in 100 Easy Lessons. We used Alpha Phonics. But now, and I'm saying that, but you have to remember that when we started, there were not a lot of good phonics programs out there. We started teaching kids to read in the mid-ish 1990s-ish. And there was a huge movement in schools towards whole language, no phonics at all. That you were supposed to teach kids whole words, whole idea, you know, just all without phonics. And then homeschooling did not have nearly the material support that it does now. So we didn't have a lot of things to pick from. But those things work. The things, you know, that we found, Teach Your Child to Read and Alpha Phonics. And it's a both and. It's phonics and it's lots of reading, lots of retelling. You know, we haven't even talked about narration, but, you know, it's both. And then if you really want to pull out a video and make good use of that video time, Leapfrog and Letter Factory were pretty fabulous. I mean, they weren't things until, I don't know, probably by my 6th, maybe 7th child, before that those were things that we could use, but they were great. And so you need a little bit of phonics, and you need a little bit of whole language. Kids need to learn sight words. So those, you need that good 50 or so words that you use all the time. And words like what or that or the or and, that you don't want them to have to stop and sound out every time. So you work on it. You make flashcards, very old fashioned, very cool, works really well. Once they know that word goes in the box. They can use those words. You can play bingo with the words, and you can play matching games with the words, and they become their words. So this combination, this balance between both phonics and great literature, meaningful stories and decoding skills, and you do it together, both. And that's the beauty of homeschooling, right? You can, if a kid needs a little more phonics, you can do a little more phonics. And you're in charge, and you can keep that balance going. The one thing I would caution you is keep the phonics instruction to a very short period each day. Don't drill it. You know, we call that drill and kill. Don't do that. Just a little bit every day, just to get the idea.
So let's talk about troubleshooting a little bit. What if it's not working? What if the kids are not getting the sight words, or the phonics isn't going well? What do you do then?
I think that you don't panic. That's the first thing you don't do. And you don't listen to any voices, whether they're in your head or in the phone coming from, I don't know, your mother-in-law saying, you know, what's going on? What, you know, this homeschooling thing isn't working. That's not true. There are plenty of kids sitting in classrooms who struggle to read or aren't reading right on the continuum that other kids are doing. So don't panic. Stop, change direction, look at the child. What does it seem like isn't developing? So check the listening skills. Does this kid need more time spent developing a habit of attention, being able to listen? Read lots and lots and lots of rhyming books where they can get even just one word, you know, where you read the first line, you read the second line, all except the last word, and they fill that in and they point to it. Memorize nursery rhymes and then point to the words, and then have them point to the words. And that's a really good way to develop a sense of letter patterns. You want to vary the practice so it doesn't feel like practice. So let them write words in pudding. It sounds ridiculous, but like any port in a storm, right? Take a paintbrush and water on the sidewalk, write words there. Use magnetic letters. Use sandpaper letters.
We use little sponges because we do the handwriting without tears. So the little sponges, these little square, and they wet them, and they can do it on a dry chalkboard and make their little letters. They love it.
They love it. Like those things, if you can vary it, and there's plenty of places where you can get ideas for things like that. I mean, that's where Google's a great thing for you. And, you know, with time, most children do develop the ability to recognize a whole word, not need to sound them out every time. And you don't want to let them get too bogged down in phonics rules and those things. And if with time and with patience, you begin to think, you know what, there's a deeper problem here, then get help. Because that's not an indictment of what you're doing. That's you being sensitive to the fact that the child might need extra help. And that's okay, because lots of kids do. You know, I have kids who definitely needed extra help. And I was a reading teacher. So, I mean, before kids. So, you know, it's not a crime to ask for help.
Yeah. Now, you encourage parents to not read too much. Even though you're a big fan of reading, you encourage not reading too much and killing the love for books and love for reading in young children. So can you talk to us about that?
So I think that it's important that, I mean, there's a fine line here. Like, I will say, okay, we're all going to sit down and read for an hour. that's what you will do. And if you want to just stare at the page for the next hour, that's fine, but we need this quiet time where the rest of us can read, and we're going to do it. What I don't like, reading should never be punishment, and neither should writing, by the way. Like, I don't have kids, oh, go write me 5 pages on why you shouldn't behave that way. Like, I don't do that. You know, I think we just need to be cognizant of what's appropriate. Reading aloud, I think for my children, there are some of them who became very dependent on that audio input and really wouldn't read for themselves, especially once you get a bunch of kids and you kind of lose track of where everybody is, like this realization that you've never actually picked up this book, or this book. All those books you've heard on audio. We need to have you read that book instead. So I think it's just a matter of being reasonable, and never ever making reading or writing something that you do if for punishment or I mean, we really want to inspire a love of reading, and we don't want it to be something that is a drudgery for any kid ever. And that doesn't mean that, you know, we don't have discipline in the whole thing, but it does mean you need to be real careful. And if a kid is struggling to read, then you need to help bear that. So if they're struggling to read, then help them read it to them. We became pretty well acquainted with various voice to text things where they could either read to a computer and have the computer help them write, or have a computer read to them. And this was with kids who had definite problems. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there's just lots of things. And we have 10 minutes to talk about writing, so we better talk fast.
Okay. All right. So let's just recap real quick. For reading, the reading part of language arts, we're first preparing our environment, an environment that has good books around, good books available, a passion, mom's passion for the books will, the kids will feed off that. Limiting screens is important, and then reading aloud consistently is important, and then not rushing teaching how to read, just allowing that time to those pre-reading years to be read aloud to, and to just enjoy that season. And then once it's time to learn to read, to gently bring in the phonics a little bit every day, the sight words and all that, and then not overkilling the love for reading in your home. So, okay, moving on to writing real fast. We might have to have part 2 of language arts, Elizabeth, because then there's narration after that.
Yeah. Well, so narration and writing, like, this is all,
they go hand in hand.
You know, they do go hand in hand. And I think that, I think we develop good writers because they love stories. And all of my children, have wanted to express themselves in writing. And part of it is they see us writing, the adults in the house writing all the time. So they think that's what grown-ups do, they write. So that's a good thing too, you know, to let them see that. But if a child's interacting with text, then they become really good narrators. And narration is a Charlotte Mason method that is one of our primary methods of teaching writing in well before a child is actually writing. So you read a story and you tell the child before that you read the story that you're going to read it once. Remember, we're developing habits of attention, and that you're going to want them to tell you everything that they remember about the story. So you do that with a child, and if the child's really young, you might be sitting at a keyboard while they tell it back to you, and you write it down as absolutely close to exactly what they said as you possibly can. And you print it out and you read it back to them, and they understand that writing is speech written on paper, that's what this is. Stories are speech written down, and that's a huge connection that they need to make. And then as they get older, narration can take on a lot of forms, but then they can begin to draw pictures. Well, they can draw pictures to go with the narration they dictated, or they can draw picture narrations. And as they get older, then they can use very rudimentary inventive spelling to begin to write some of their narrations. A narration is also, what we do with Dad at the end of the day when he says, "So, what'd you learn today?" And they have to be able, like the rule is, they have to be able to articulate it. They have to be able to say something more than, "Oh, we learned about rocks." What did you learn about rocks? And it's drawing that development of language and speech out of them. And then eventually them understanding that the printed word is speech written down. And I think that really important with little kids at the very beginning of this, when you're first encouraging them to narrate, take the struggle away, especially boys. Little boys cannot possibly handwrite fast enough to get their great ideas on paper. So sit there and type it for them, because then they have their story in their hands. And then you have a writer on his way to being a writer. Another way to get around the inventive spelling hurdle, when I have a kid who doesn't want to write because they know they're not spelling it right, and they don't want to take a chance. Like, I just won't, because I know that that's not how you're supposed to spell it, but I don't know how you are supposed to spell it. Have them create a prayer journal. Let them choose a really pretty bound book and write and draw all his prayers in there. And then you tell him, well, God can read it. He knows what's on your heart. Like, he already knows it. So you just do your thing in your journal and know that that's your safe space. So I think the thing about narration is we want children to become very comfortable, very young, and forevermore with the idea that you have to pay attention. You have to pay attention when you're doing a science experiment. You have to pay attention when you're taking a walk. You have to pay attention when you're listening to a story or when you're reading it for yourself, because I am going to ask you what that was about. And if you can develop that habit of attention in your children, you will be well on your way to creating really great writers. Like, that's so strange. I know it seems like, wait, what? But that habit of attention really does fuel their ability to write. I remind my kids all the time that the theory is that Laura Ingalls became such a good writer because Mary was blind and she learned to narrate the whole world to her sister, to tell her in detail what those flowers look like, what that lady looks like, how big is she, how whatever, and all those images spoken aloud stuck. She didn't write those books until she was much older, like middle-aged beyond, but she had this beautiful habit of attention and then articulation, and that's what narration does. I don't know if we can do this justice. We might have to do this again.
I just wanted to share the encouragement that when you start and they give you a 2-word response back and you're like, oh, wow, this is going great. Just hang tight, because the next day and the next day and the next week and the next month, as they become used to you asking them, like, it really is a habit. And if you do it with multiple children, at least, well, I had 3 boys in 3 years, so they do everything together, but now they egg each other on. So if I'm reading aloud at the end, they're like, well, you forgot that fact and you forgot, but it really helps them. They're competitive. I don't know where they got their competitive nature from, but it helps them with the habit, and it's a good thing. But it definitely, for me, when I first started, I was like, oh man, Charlotte Mason, this isn't working at the Weinert house.
Well, and I think the competitive thing works to your advantage in a house full of boys, because, you know, you can even say, you know, let's see, like, we'll keep going around, everybody fill in one detail, we'll see who the last man standing is, who can still fill in a detail. But then the other thing that is so interesting to me, especially once they start writing and they're not feeding off of each other's narrations, or maybe if they are, is to think about the fact that, you know, 4 different people can come at this from 4 different angles and still all be true. And the best example of that is that the Gospels are narrations. You know, it's 4 different people, and now they're all inspired by the same Holy Spirit, clearly, but the charism of each apostle is evident when you look at the retellings of the same events. And I think that happens with our kids too. You know, you're going to have the kid who is super focused on whatever the food was. You know, how did it smell? How did it taste? Who ate how much? Or you're going to have the kid who's telling about the flowers down to the last minute detail. And they were at the same picnic, right? But it's just totally different. And I think that's really cool.
Mm-hmm. It really is. Okay, so do we stop here? Or do we keep going?
We've only got 3 minutes, and we got to talk about dictation and copy work.
I think we need part 2.
So, I mean, we'll think about how we can do this. We might be able to tie it into history or something, and we'll rearrange the order of things. I don't know.
Plus, everyone's going to be buying your book in 2 weeks, so they're going to get all this anyway.
Oh my gosh!
It will. You're on the clock now, Elizabeth.
Oh,
you have to finish the book
in 2 weeks. Okay. Well, we'll see.
Yeah. Hey, real quick before we go, I wanted to share this because it just came in the mail. So these are the cheapest little journals. I mean, so cheap, from Mead. They're called Primary Journal, and I don't know if you can see this, they have spots on the top for them to draw a picture. And then on the bottom, this is for K through 2. So it's got the wider lines. I got these. So I have a lot of kids. So I got like a 6-pack from Amazon. You can also get just, you know, you can pick your color for your kid and just get one. But these are really good because it helps the transition from the drawing or the oral telling to the writing, because it's the same page. So once they transition, they're still using their same notebook. So they don't even really know that they've, you know, the difference. Or I can write on it. For my little ones, I can write in it, but they draw the picture on the top. So these are really fun.
It's hard to find bound notebooks like that with space. That's cool. Story paper.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay.
All right. So we will be back next Thursday. We'll get the new links up in our Instagram profile so you can register. Thank you all so much for coming and being here. I hope that this is an encouragement to you. This is such an encouragement to me. I just am soaking this up and I love it so much. So thank you, Elizabeth, for taking the time.
Is everybody asleep in your house now?
No one's come in, so hopefully my husband's I'm sure he has. I'm sure everyone's fast asleep and all is well. And he went grocery shopping for me tonight, so he wins Husband of the Year tonight.
Yay.
So, yeah. All right. God bless you all. Have a wonderful night. We'll see you next Thursday.
Bye.